How you going, folks? Tuesday, I'm back with you. Thanks for joining me. This video we're going to take a look at how I go about setting up the Digitakt, Elektron Digitakt with the Overbridge system inside of Bitwig Studio. How I approach it and set it up. So there's probably a few different ways you can go about it. I've seen a few other videos that approach it a little bit differently to myself, but I thought it'd be useful maybe for some others that would find this workflow of mine particularly useful, because it's a little bit different and I find it works for me at least, so it may work for someone else too. So I'll just go through how I set it up and try and explain everything as best I can as to why I do it this way. So firstly, we're going to add an instrument track, and we're going to want to drop the plugin straight on that. So Digitakt plugin. Not sure why I thought I had a 64-bit plugin somewhere. I can't seem to find it, but it doesn't matter in this case. It's not going to matter. This is the interface for the Overbridge plugin. I'm not going to go too far into all the ins and outs of this plugin in this video, at least. So I just want to cover more or less how I go about setting it up so we can use the Overbridge system with Bitwig Studio. So I'll just close that for now. I don't think we really need that open at this point. So what I would like to do is use the Digitakt and have all of the audio tracks of the Digitakt, which are these first top row of 8 buttons, and each one corresponds to a separate audio track that can be routed into Bitwig via the USB and the Overbridge plugin. But by default, like, this instrument channel is a MIDI track, so all of the sequencing that you want to do inside the host for the Digitakt will be done with this instrument channel here, and I'll explain how I go about that in a moment. But getting back to routing the audio back into Bitwig, you would ideally want to have each audio track on the Digitakt come into its own audio track inside of Bitwig Studio. By default, the Overbridge system doesn't actually set this up, so there's a few things you'll need to do in order to make this happen. So firstly is you want to go to this little device box, plugin device box on the instrument channel, and you'll notice this little arrow selector option here. You want to click on that. Now this brings up a prompt to activate these add missing chains, it's called. So we need to open that, and now we can see all of the internal audio tracks from the Digitakt coming into the plugin here, the Bitwig, the Overbridge plugin inside of Bitwig, and we can access these audio tracks inside of our mix tab here. So this is our instrument channel, and if we expand on this now, the device shows us these extra audio tracks, and if we want to process these individually, we can do so by dropping effects and so on down the bottom here on each track, as you would normally. However, you will not see these tracks in the arrangement here. They don't show up, which is something that's bothered me a little bit, initially. I mean, you can work around it, but I just would have thought this would be, something you could have by default, but it's not the case. So what we need to do is add, not more instruments, but we're going to need to add the audio tracks manually for each of these 8 audio channels coming from the Digitakt. So we'll just add all of these. So we've got, now have 8 separate audio channels, and we'll color them all the same. So they're all the same color. They can be identified as, a group by this orange color. So now that we have these separate audio tracks, we actually need to set up the routing to bring the audio from the Overbridge plugin into each of these. So to do that, we need to basically just go through each of these channels and configure the routing with these ins and options here. So if we open this input selection box here, we can select from these options, and we have the Digitakt appear under the tracks, which is this Digitakt track up here, you can see. So the Digitakt plugin is there. You can access these Digitakt chains, and I tend to use the pre channels for each. So track 1 pre, we'll go for audio 2. So the numbers here aren't going to quite line up due to the number of tracks we have here, but not to worry, we can still set this up so it will be somewhat tedious, but go for 2 pre on audio 3, and then we'll have 3 pre for audio 4, and so on, through to audio 9. So I'll just set these up. Just bear with me a moment. So that'll be 4 pre. 5 pre. 8 pre. So now we should, by rights, have all of those audio channels on the Digitakt. You can see the metering inside the mixer. This is input for the audio input to the Digitakt. So I have a Volca FM plugged into mine, as you can hear there, coming in on one channel. I think I'll just not sure if I can just make that mono, but yeah, it doesn't matter. I don't want to get too carried away. That's for audio input on the Digitakt. So getting back to this metering, we can see it here in this mixer, and we can process the internal audio channels if we so choose to, but I want to be able to see it in the arrangement as well. So one caveat is I've found that the metering, even arming all of these channels here, isn't going to display for each of these audio tracks, even though the audio is being routed into them. So you can see that the Digitakt instrument channel lights up for each of the 8 audio channels, but these audio tracks don't. However, the audio is being routed into these channels, so don't be put off. If we just disarm that track and hit play. I think I've got a pattern internal on the Digitakt that will play if I play. Now hit record. You can see it capturing that audio. It's recording the audio of each independent channel, like so. So the audio is being routed into these channels. We just don't get to see the metering as that is playing in real time. But if we just play back this audio, once it's recorded into the audio channels, the metering now works as you would expect. So that's just one thing to bear in mind, and that now just allows us to edit the audio, so to speak. We can, enter these clips and chop and change and do whatever we like with them. So that's how I like to approach it. I want to be able to process each individual audio channel separately. I can also just process each track now here in these audio tracks instead of doing it on these channels inside of the, which is virtually inside of the plugin itself. So I tend not to spend too much time in the mix page unless I'm mixing down later in projects, but yeah, that's how I like to have it set up. So if we want to sequence the Digitakt from Bitwig Studio with MIDI, like I was saying earlier, we want to add a MIDI clip on this instrument channel here. So if we open this clip into the editor, we can now hit these notes, and we're going to trigger we can see that's triggering audio track 1, and that's chromatic as well, so you can sequence each channel chromatically by punching notes in like so. And if we play that now, I'll actually just punch in an empty sequence on the Digitakt itself, so we can just hear the MIDI inside of Bitwig triggering the sounds in the Digitakt. And we're hearing that triggering the Volca FM2, so I'm going to need to mute that track. So now if we play, okay, so we'll just loop this little 1-bar MIDI clip here and try again. So we're hearing all of this audio, so I'll just mute these audio tracks and I'll just move that MIDI clip over here, so we're not going to hear all that audio on top of what we are triggering. So let's try again. We'll just play that MIDI. So now we can just hear these notes that we've punched in. And you might be wondering, how are we going to trigger the rest of the channels? So to do that, we need to access the rest of the MIDI channels with this layered editing mode. So we engage that and turns on, brings up this dialog here, so we can see this channels tab here opens the 16 channels of MIDI that we can access with this MIDI editor. Okay, so now each of these channels, the first 8 channels will correspond to the 8 channels of audio inside the Digitakt if it's set by default, you can go about changing the MIDI channels inside the Digitakt, but you don't have to worry about that. This is just how it is straight up with default settings. So you just basically can choose from these channels now as to which channel you'd like to edit. So channel 3. Channel 4. Channel 5. Channel 6. Oops. I'm not sure channel 6 has a sound, maybe. Doesn't seem to be channel. So we're too high up in the frequency range of MIDI notes. So if we take that down here, we can try that. So you get the idea. You can, edit all of the individual audio tracks from the Digitakt, sequence them all from this one instrument channel here. So it's pretty handy and it stops heaps of clutter, instead of having 8 separate MIDI channels with MIDI for each track separately, you just end up with a big cluttered arrangement and it's not real necessary. So I like to approach it like this, and just keeps it more streamlined, and it's still easy enough to edit, you can see all the MIDI in one spot. So it's, I just find it's easier to work this way. I guess one more thing I'll note, before we wrap this up, is certain options on the actual Digitakt hardware. You'll need to, this is probably going to be a bit hard to see inside of this little, the window, but you want to go into the system settings tab or page, USB config page, and then make sure you've got Overbridge ticked. Although we do now have this option, which is USB audio MIDI, which I obviously haven't actually used. Yeah, I typically use Overbridge. But Elektron has, in the recent update, have now allowed the routing of the audio and MIDI channels straight into the host without the use of the Overbridge plugin. So I'm yet to actually try that, but you probably want to use it either of those two ways. And I think, you can also use it as a MIDI device as well, but yeah, typically I just use the Overbridge with the Overbridge plugin because I like using this drum machine, but sequencing with the MIDI inside of Bitwig can be pretty cool and lets you expand well beyond the 64 steps, or however many steps it is on the patterns on inside of the Digitakt sequencer. So that's about it. I think I've covered most of what I wanted to, and obviously there's more in-depth MIDI settings you may need to look at depending on your configuration of your setup with other MIDI devices and so on. Yeah, I think that's basically how I go about using Digitakt with Overbridge inside of Bitwig Studio. So if you've got questions or comments, anything like that, feel free to drop a line in the comments and I'll get back to you. And yeah, thanks for watching. Hope this has been of use. So I'll leave it there and see you in the next video. Cheers for watching.